Good morning, and welcome to Liberty Baptist Church and American Legion Post 104 Memorial Day ceremony today. On behalf of the Post 104 and Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 9855 and the auxiliaries of both units, I want to welcome each of you for being here today for this commemoration and to thank you for your attendance. I'm Howard Gregory, Public Relations Officer for Post 104. If you'll refer to your program, you'll note that some portions of today's program are marked with an asterisk. And please stand as you're able for those portions of the program. We certainly want to thank Dr. Rusty Small, the elders here at Liberty Baptist Church, and the congregation for the opportunity to use this beautiful facility for our service today. Just as administrative notice, any of you that are not familiar with the area, the restrooms are located just outside the door over here to my right. You know, some Americans confuse the significance of Memorial Day with Veterans Day that's celebrated on November 11th of each year, and which honors all of our veterans, living and dead. But today, we're especially recognizing those veterans who made the supreme sacrifice and died in service to our country or as a result of injuries received in battle. Too many Americans think of Memorial Day as only a day to go to the mall for a sale, to go to the lake, to have a barbecue, or for some other leisure activity. But by your very presence here today, you demonstrate your understanding of the real significance of this day, and we certainly thank you for that. I'll call on the Reverend Gene Riffey to render the invocation in just a moment. Pastor Brian Moore is under the weather today and could not be here, but please stand as you're able. And before he does that, and that'll be followed by the national anthem sung by Ms. Brittany Bryant, and then the Pledge of Allegiance. But please stand as you're able, and we'll have a moment of silence in memory of the tragedy in Uvalde, Texas.
Kind and gracious Heavenly Father, you, the Supreme Commander of our armed forces, it is today that we remember those who committed so much for so many so that we can celebrate this moment. It's a pleasure, it's a joy, and it is an honor that we can assemble in this place, but we need your presence to be made known. Touch our hearts that we will never forget the price that has been paid for this moment. But bless this gathering, we ask. We ask it all in thy holy name, Lord Jesus. Amen and amen.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please join me as we pledge allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. All of you are very special people and loyal Americans, as indicated by your very presence here today. But certainly we have a few exceptional individuals with us, I believe, that we'd like to recognize and thank for their service. Those are the members of that greatest generation who served during World War II or the Korean conflict to defend our nation and our way of life. If you're a World War II veteran or a Korean War veteran or the family of one of those veterans, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. Thank you for your service. In addition to our keynote speaker that will be introduced more properly in a few moments, we're honored by the presence of some of our town local officials. State Senator Mark Peake sends his regards that he could not be here today. He's invariably with us at every one of these ceremonies. I know we have a member of our town council, Mary Lou Spiegel, here. It's Mary Lou up front here. Do we have any other elected officials that I cannot see out there in the audience? Any other elected officials here? Oh, Claudia Puckett from Town Council and our Commonwealth's Attorney Les Fleet. I cannot see where you all are out there, but I'd like to recognize you. Are there any other elected officials here? Thank you. We're also honored to have the Virginia State Police and the Appomattox County Sheriff's Office representatives with us here today, and we appreciate what you all do each and every day as first responders to protect us here on the home front. Thank you. I will now call the Post 104 Commander, Ron Crockless, to share a few of his remarks with us. Commander.
Thank you, everybody. It's definitely a privilege and an honor to have the support of the town of Appomattox, city of Appomattox, the town council, city council, the church, several other organizations throughout the Appomattox area that support Post 104 and the VFW post. Without the support from this town, we cannot do anything to help maintain and take care of our veterans within the community. So I just want to say thank you. And why I do that, I'm going to ask Don Jones to come up. And so on behalf of the American Legion, Post 104, to Liberty Baptist, for their generous contributions, dedication, and service and support of American Legion Post 104, Appomattox, Virginia, on numerous occasions. On May 30th, 2022, Liberty Baptist Church, with Dr. Rusty Smalls, the elders, the staff, and the congregation of Liberty Baptist Church hosted our 2022 Memorial Day service to commemorate the loss of the heroes who gave their lives to preserve our nation and our way of life. Liberty Baptist Church patriotism, loyalty, and greatly enhances our efforts in our mission to serve our military and fellow veterans and promote patriotism to our community for God and country. Presented by myself, Commander, and the officers and the members of American Legion Post 104, Appomattox. At this time, I'd like to call Sergeant of the Arms Don Barney forward so that we can light our candle on the POWMA table. Don? The POWMA empty chair is placed at all official meetings of the American Legion. It is an official symbol of the thousands of America's POWs and MIAs still unaccounted for from all wars and the conflicts involving the United States of America. This is a reminder to all of us to spare no effort to secure and release any American prisoner from captivity, the repatriatism of the remains of those who died bravely in defense of our liberty, and a full accounting of those missing. Let us rededicate ourselves to this vital endeavor. Thank you, Don. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our gracious host. And I thank you all again for coming out to our ceremony. And for those veterans that are here that are not a member of either the VFW or Post 104, please come back and see me. Come see the table back there. let us tell you what we do here in the community as the two veteran organizations and what we can do and how we can use your support just like everybody else in the town supports us. Thank you very much. Tom?
Thank you, Commander. Please refer to page 2 of your program for a list of those patriots from Appomattox County who gave their lives for the freedoms that we enjoy today. The names of those heroes are inscribed on a monument over in front of the courthouse, and I would urge you to stop by and just think what they have done for us sometimes when you're over in front of the courthouse. Please remember that they were more than a name on the monument. They were flesh and blood human beings like you and me, with hopes, dreams, and plans that would never be. They were from this county and from this town. They once walked the same streets, rode over the same highways that we travel today. They left behind parents, wives, sweethearts, children, and friends who loved them. Those survivors have sat across the dinner table from an empty chair. They've waited for the car that did not pull into the driveway, and they've listened for the voice that did not answer from the next room. We are so richly blessed by the sacrifices that have been made for us and to inherit the legacy of freedom that they left to us. As General George Patton once said, we should thank God that these men lived. These heroes gave all of their tomorrows so that we could have our wonderful freedoms today. We'll now have placement of a memorial wreath. I'll ask you to stand as President Linda Mays of American Legion Post 104 Auxiliary and President Sally Walker of Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 9855 Auxiliary place a memorial wreath to honor those heroes. Please stand as you're able. Now we'll have a very special presentation, a bouquet of 17 poppies that has a very special significance for our speaker today. President Linda Mays will present that to Commander Kirk Lippold. Thank you, Linda. Okay, please be seated. We'll now have a musical selection honoring all of our military in addition to those in that greatest generation that we recognized just a moment ago. We want to honor our current and former members of our military who have served us today, and thankfully they made it through and do not have to be commemorated on Memorial Day themselves. We know that they have endured separation from family and friends, endured bitter cold, scorching heat, hunger and thirst, and entirely too often witnessed the death of good friends and the injury of other friends. We will never forget them and those still missing in action and those who are prisoners of war, just as illustrated by our prisoner of war table in the front here. If you served or are serving, as we have this musical selection honoring all branches of our service, please stand and be recognized.
Shout, counter marching all about.
United States Navy. United States Coast Guard. States Air Force. United States Marine Corps.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First we fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor free. We are proud to claim the title of United States
Yes, thank you to each of our veterans. It's such a small token, but it's the very least we can do is to thank you for your service and what you have done for all of us. As has been said of our military, all gave some, and some gave all. Today we're honoring those who gave their all, their very lives. And we have an exceptionally qualified speaker with us today that we're so honored to have with us. As your program reflects, our speaker is Commander Kirk S. Lippold of the United States Navy, retired. He was the commanding officer of the USS Cole when it came under a suicide attack by al-Qaeda in the port of Aden, Yemen, on October 12th of 2000. 17 U.S. Navy sailors were killed and 37 were injured. Commander Lippold and his crew distinguished themselves by saving that ship from sinking. This event is widely recognized as one of the most brazen and horrible acts of terrorism by al-Qaeda prior to September 11th of 2001. Commander Lippold is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and received his commission in the Navy in 1981. He served on several ships, including a tank landing ship and guided missile cruisers and destroyers. He graduated from the Navy Postgraduate School, where he received a Master of Science degree in System Engineering, and is also a 1994 graduate of the United States Army Command and General Staff College, along with a number of other military schools that he has graduated from with great distinction. Currently, Commander Lippold is president of Lippold Strategies, LLC, a consulting firm specializing in executive leadership development, crisis management, and national security affairs. He has appeared on numerous security issues affecting our nation on national and international television. He is also the author of a book, Front Burner, al-Qaeda's attack on the USS Cole, that recounts that story of the bombing of his ship. and the continuing ramifications that it has for our national security at a day like this, which we're facing challenges such as we've never faced before. Commander Lippold.
Good morning, everybody. The first thing I'd like to do before I begin my formal remarks is that I know there's Veterans Day for all the veterans that serve in the audience today, but it's really, I'd like to take a minute and thank everyone else, because on October 12, 2000, when USS Cole was attacked by al-Qaeda terrorists in the port of Aden, Yemen, it was your thoughts, your support, and your prayers that not only got us through that fateful day, but also you helped sustain those families as they waited and wondered back here on the home front, what was the status of their loved ones? Had they survived? Had they been wounded? Or had they paid that ultimate price that we pause and take today to honor them? So on behalf of my crew, but also the young men and women serving today that are putting themselves in harm's way, that are willing to make that ultimate sacrifice, thank you for what you do here at home, here in the Appomattox area, because you truly do make it possible for us to stay and remain the greatest nation in the world. So thank you. I think like a lot of us, when you look back and you think about joining, at the tender age of 18, for most of us, we stood out there, we raised our right hand, and we swore that oath to support and defend our nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that we'd be willing to die for something for the first time that we believed in so much. And I don't know about those that are in the audience, but I truly had no clue what I was getting into when I did that. And it took years to kind of wrap your head around what you were doing, and as time marched on, whether you were just one enlisted tour or you served out the time that I owed in the case of the Naval Academy, and then you moved on in life, you eventually begin to realize what that commitment to service means. What that means not only for yourself, but for your families and for our nation, and why that commitment can ultimately result in tragedy back home. And you hope and pray that it never happens. I was very fortunate to stand at the very back end of USS Cole on the flight deck, where we land, refuel, and rearm helicopters, where I was able to say the three greatest words in a naval officer's career: I relieve you. With those three simple words, I carried out a centuries-old, time-honored tradition where I assumed total accountability for that $1 billion plus national asset and the lives of almost 300 of our nation's finest sailors. And I pushed them because I knew that we may go in harm's way out of our home port just down the road here in Norfolk, Virginia. And I kept raising that bar, pushing that ship, demanding that they always do better, because I knew what my crew was capable of, and I wanted them to be ready. From the very first day I took command until that time when we would deploy about a year later in August of 2000. When we train like that, you do it for a reason, because you don't want that knock on that door back home. You want to make sure that you're ready. As we got ready to go, the day before we left, we got the crew into their dress uniforms, put them down on the pier, and took this last final photo as a memory for all of us. All the officers and chiefs down on the pier, crew up, standing on the, what they call manning the rails. Well, the next day when we would get underway and get the ship ready to go and we would man the rail, crews standing out there, parade rest, friends and family down on the pier cheerfully waving goodbye to their loved ones for the next 6 months. What we had trained for was to leave our home port of Norfolk, Virginia, and cross the Atlantic through the Mediterranean, go to the Middle East, and go to the North Arabian Gulf to enforce United Nations sanctions against the country of Iraq. But as USS Cole got underway the next morning, and we headed out first into the Elizabeth River, then the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic, We achieved something that had never been done before in the Navy and has never been repeated since. As we got our ship underway, every single one of my officers manned that rail. Who got that crew underway? Who got that ship underway? A 100% qualified enlisted crew. Now, if you think they were happy and pleased about that achievement, they weren't. They kind of looked at it and said, this is good. The old man's got a nice check in the blocks for his promotion, good for him. But I've missed my kids' ballet recitals, soccer games. I didn't get the honey-do list done at home. I didn't get all the chores that I wanted. I didn't get quality time with the family. And on duty days, after working all day, then standing a watch, they didn't get to go down and watch TV. They were tracing systems around the ship. But what that standard did for them is when we took a hit and almost 20% of the crew was killed and injured, they now had the confidence to step into those vacant positions and do what was necessary to save our ship and save our shipmates. So we sailed out, crossed the Atlantic, pulled into the Mediterranean, and then unfortunately we had to suffer for 4 miserable long weeks. We had to suffer through Barcelona, Spain, Villafranche, France, Valletta, Malta, Koper, Slovenia. I don't care what service you're in, we, the United States Navy, still have the best tagline. Join the Navy, see the world, and that's exactly what they did. They went and saw bullfights. They went and saw the Louvre. They saw the Eiffel Tower. They saw St. Paul's Shipwreck Cathedral. Koper, Slovenia, far most northern country from the breakup of Yugoslavia, passport bus ride. They're taking gondola rides around Venice, Italy. But eventually that wasn't what we were there for. We would leave and come down to an underway replenishment alongside of an oiler at the mouth of the Adriatic, across the eastern Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal on the 9th of October, down the Red Sea, rounded the corner, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm off this little port called Aden, Yemen. It sits at the southwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula and is about the halfway point between the European theater and the 6th Fleet area of operations in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, Central Command, and the 5th Fleet area of operations in the Middle East. We had gone from a Navy of 4,000 ships in World War II to just shy of 600 ships during the Reagan buildup in the mid-'80s. That morning we had 315 ships and there wasn't an oiler within 1,000 miles, so they ordered us into the port of Aden. Djibouti on the east coast of Africa was the alternate, but it had a higher threat. So we pulled into Aden that morning. And as we pulled in, I made my first force protection decision. When we got into the harbor, I turned the ship around and I moored it, bow out, pointed out of the harbor, just in case something might happen. We had 2 tugs that had escorted us the entire way. We shut down the 4 main engines that powered the 2 shafts on the ship and left 2 generators running. And then we began the import refueling checklist. That's the list we use to make sure that all the systems are aligned, all the valves are aligned, that we're going to be taking on. In our case, we carried a little over 500,000 gallons of fuel. We were below 50%, would be taking on 250,000 gallons. Well, when we go to take on that 250,000 gallons, you want to make sure that everything is absolutely aligned. Now, the way the ship is designed organizationally, you have a commanding officer, an executive officer, and a series of department heads. Combat systems, weapons, supply, operations, and engineering. Under that engineer was a main propulsion assistant. Young officer came up to my cabin, and it was about 10 o'clock that morning, knocks on my door, says, "Captain, everything down below checks out. Checklist is complete. The valves were properly aligned. I'm going to speed things up a little bit, sir. The chief engineer is doing her backup checks. If you would go to the bottom of the checklist right now and sign off on it, we can get refueling that much quicker once I go down and wait for her in the central control station, which is the nerve center for the engineering plant." Well, I looked at him and I said, "Wait a minute, MPA. You know as well as I do when we refuel the ship, we do it by the book. So take the checklist down, wait for the engineer, and when she's done and brings it back up, I'll sign off on it." Now, this is a young, talented officer. He had started out in the Navy as that young fireman recruit, promoted up through the enlisted ranks to Chief Petty Officer E7, and then made the big challenge and become an officer. 13 years of experience under his belt. A great mentor for my young junior officers learning about leadership and management for the first time in their careers, if not their lives. But I looked at him and said, "Take that checklist down." He walked over to my desk, grabbed the checklist, and as he walked out of my cabin, he was expressing his complete and total satisfaction with my logic. Which, as a good sailor, I will not repeat this morning. But unfortunately, that was also the last time I'd see Drew alive. At 10:30, the chief engineer came up. She knocked on the door and said, "Captain, checklist is complete, valves are properly lined, question mission to refuel USS Cole." Double-checked the list, signed off on the bottom. A few minutes later, we started pumping fuel. 10:40. Supply officer comes up, says, "Captain, we got a great deal. When we pulled in through the embassy, we asked for 3 things. Refuel the ship, pump sewage into a barge that was actually tied off back by the flight deck at that point, and take fresh water from the pier since we didn't want to make it out of the dirty harbor water in port. But the logistics agent for the port has made a very generous offer, and for $150 and no questions asked, they'll send out 3 garbage barges to us to take off all the trash, all the plastic, and all the hazardous material that we can't dump at sea." How much? $150? No. She gives me an exasperated look, and I said, "Hey, we're not overflowing on any of that stuff. In 4 days, we're going to pull into Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. I can get rid of all that stuff for free. We're going to pass." So as she is walking out of my cabin, like my main post assistant, she too was thanking me for my leadership and guidance in helping to execute her fiduciary responsibilities. Does she give up? Not a chance. 10:50, knock on the door. Now she has reinforcements. She walks in with the executive officer. He says, "Wait a minute. Sir, think about it." And he plays the logic game. We have a $1 billion ship with a multi-million-dollar budget. We are only 12 days into the fiscal year. We will find $150 worth of budget efficiencies in the next 353 days. I didn't want to pitch the fight. I looked at the supply officer, said, "Fine, Denise, go make it happen." She grinned from ear to ear. And believe it or not, sometimes, despite what you tell your crew, they'll do the right thing. 2 boats had already come out, one to the middle of the ship, one back by the flight deck. And the crew had already brought up all the trash, all the plastic, all the hazmat, piled it up on the flight deck in the middle of the ship, and we're just patiently waiting for the captain to get his act together. So all she did was walk out, whistle, and they started dumping everything into the boats, and we're all on track. But at that point, the executive officer on the way up to see me had checked in with the central control station to find out how the refueling going. It was not only going good, it was going great. Too great. When we opened up the valve on the pier, and we opened up the valve on the ship, and the fuel began to flow into us, instead of what we expected as a 300 to 500 gallon per minute rate, we were going to be there 6 to 8 hours. The initial rate coming on board USS Cole was actually 2,500 gallons per minute. It was coming on so fast that we were overpressurizing the fuel tanks, had to holler at the Yemeni fuel workers down on the pier to tighten the valve and bring that rate down to 2,000 gallons a minute. But at that rate, I could fill the big centerline tanks, I could fill the wing tanks, and I'd be done in 2 to 2.5 hours. Supply officer was ready to feed the noon meal, chicken fajitas. That way, about the time that I finish refueling the ship, if I start feeding the crew right now, I can get the entire crew fed, and when we go get underway, no delays whatsoever, and back out to sea where Navy ships feel safe. Said, "Go make the announcement." I turned back to my desk to do what we all love to do, right? That never-ending stack of paperwork and bureaucracy that justifies our job at a paycheck every day. It doesn't change when you're in the Navy, and as a matter of fact, it's probably even worse. But as I'm sitting at my desk and I hear the announcement for the crew to eat the early meal, at 11:18 in the morning, there was a thunderous explosion. You could feel all 505 feet and 8,400 tons of guided missile destroyer suddenly and violently thrust up and to the right. The ship hesitated for a sec, then slid back down into the water, rocking violently from side to side, surging fore and aft on the mooring lines. Power went out, lights failed, ceiling tiles popped out. I literally come up on the balls of my feet, grabbing the underside of my desk as everything had popped up and slammed back down. When the ship stopped moving to a point that I could let go, I went over to the door in my cabin, and I looked down the passageway or hallway leading toward the port side and the wardroom where the officers eat. And at the far end, this gray cloud comes around the corner, rolls toward me, and silently washes over me. I could smell the dust. I could smell the fuel. But there was this acrid metallic tang that settled in the back of my mouth, and I didn't know what it was. Young officer that lived in the stateroom behind my cabin comes out, grabs the door jamb, looks at me wide-eyed, and using good sailor-like language asks me, "What the F was that?" Then he goes, "Fuel." And just like those young men and women today, he did not hesitate for 1 second, and he took off into that gray cloud toward the danger to find out what had happened. I took 1 step out of my cabin to follow him, and stopped. In that instant, I knew USS Cole had been attacked. When I pulled the ship in, turned it around, and moored it starboard side of the pier, if it had been a fuel explosion on the ship or the pier, I should have been blown to the left. Instead, I'd been thrust up and to the right. The only thing on the left side of that ship that could have done that was if something had come alongside and exploded. I went back into my darkened cabin, back into the bedroom area. Near the head of my bed is the safe where I kept all the keys to the weapon systems on the ship. Missiles, torpedoes, 5-inch gun, 20-millimeter close-in weapon system. I bent down, dialed it open. I don't pull out a handful of keys. I pulled out a SIG 229, 9mm, loaded it, chambered around, decocked it, 2 clips of ammunition into my pocket, back out through my cabin, down one deck, and ran to the middle of the ship. I'm in the semi-enclosed area looking back toward the flight deck. The 3-person watch team that used to be there in the middle of the ship, keeping an eye on the fuel workers, gone. The wooden podium, almost exactly like this one here, has been blown in pieces and is scattered across the deck. Wires that used to form our high-frequency radio antenna are snapped off and draped down, and dirty black water is dripping off of everything. I don't know if we're going to be boarded. I don't know if there's going to be a follow-on attack. All I know is that I need to get to the port side and find out what's going on. I took that deep breath holding that 9mm as I got ready to go. I had that instantaneous flashback. I remembered standing in the center courtyard of the Naval Academy as I'd raised my right hand and swore that oath. This might be my destiny. And all I could think as I got ready to go, like many of you in here did, I said, well, if you see someone that doesn't recognize you, make them duck first and don't leave an empty round in the chamber. And as I rolled out toward the port side, the first person I see isn't a terrorist. It is my chief gunner's mate, responding with his security teams to reestablish the defensive perimeter around the ship. He comes up, talks to me. We walked over to the port side after stabilizing things, looked over the side, and it confirmed my worst fears. You could tell from the exterior of the ship, all the metal was shoved inward. You could see the spray pattern of explosive residue on the side of the ship, meaning it was an external explosion. And as I glanced up and down the left side of USS Cole, everything that was metal, fiberglass, or plastic was either crushed in or had been blown completely off the equipment itself. But as I glanced up and down the left side, there are 4 orange rafts alongside the ship. 1 sunk in the blast hole. 2 more deflated lying alongside the ship, and back by the flight deck is a fully inflated orange raft. First thing that went through my mind was, how did someone let these rafts get alongside the ship? Clearly that first one blew up, and that's what put the hole in the side. The next 2, peppered with shrapnel, knocked the detonators loose, which is why they're deflated and didn't go off. But that one by the flight deck is fully inflated, and if it goes, I'm going to be in big trouble, because it'll take out the 2 screws that propel the ship, the 2 rudders that steer it, and there will be no way I can get USS Cole out of port. So at that point in time, though, all these sailors are coming out from inside of the ship. And what are they doing? They're walking right over to the port side, and they're leaning over trying to see what's happening. What do I see them doing? They're exposing the upper half of their bodies to an explosive-laden raft that if it goes off is instantly going to kill them. So at that point, I made them get everyone that wasn't part of the security teams back inside the skin of the ship. That decision would have huge ramifications later. At that point in time, I turned to the chief, left him in charge of the security, said, I need to get to the bridge. Told him the obvious, don't allow any more boats alongside. I went inside the darkened ship, up to the bridge, walked out, and there's my operations officer and navigator. What do we have? Sure, we have no ability to communicate and no power. I said, wait a minute, by my chair's the handheld bridge-to-bridge walkie-talkie. My navigator brought it to me, checked channel 16, contacted the Yemeni Port Authority and asked them for 3 things. Freeze all harbor movements since we didn't know where the attack had come from. Notify local hospitals, and they said they had 2, and we get the ambulances down to the pier. And the 3rd was send boats out to us. But I put a condition on them. When the boats come out, I want them to come around the stern of the ship, come to the back of the refueling pier, and we will get the wounded down to you. But they also told them they must not come any closer than 100 meters to my port side, or I will shoot you. Do you understand? Well, the Yemeni Port Authority said, yes, yes, we understand. When those boats started coming out, I observed a very unique phenomenon. I don't care where you are in the world. When you tell someone something like that, you will find there is no problem with the English language. Those boats stayed probably 300 meters away from us. They made a huge arc around the stern of the ship, and they very gingerly approached that pier. We had to get used to boats coming out to us that no longer represented a threat. How did we know that? Immediately after they shoved the crew inside, one of the security team members had come running up to me and said, Captain, those rafts aren't the problem, sir. The 2 boats that we loaded up with trash left and were halfway across the harbor when a boat that looked just like the garbage barges came, slowed by the bow, came down the side of the ship right to the middle, sir. That's what blew up. A waterborne improvised explosive device with 2 suicide bombers, and we had now little pieces of boat and bomber all over the top side of the ship. The concussion from the explosion had blown our life rafts out of their containers, and that's what had landed in the water. Those orange rafts were actually our life rafts for the ship. So we got a hook and brought them on board. So we knew that they didn't represent a danger. By the same token now, my crew had to get used to a very angry, very agitated crew that had broken out every crew-served weapon and pointed at those Yemenis boats coming at us. 50 caliber machine guns, M60 machine guns, M79 grenade launchers, M14s, 12-gauge shotguns, 9mm pistols, and if they'd kept on coming, wrenches, hammers, screwdrivers, it was whatever it was going to take to defend our ship. But at this point in time, now we have to stop. USS Cole is in trouble. Everyone in here, I'm sure, has used a level, and we have the same thing going side to side and fore and aft on the ship. USS Cole is listing over 5.5 degrees to port and down 1 degree by the bow. We could literally feel our ship sinking beneath our feet. I left the operations officer in charge, gave him new rules for the rules of engagement. I went down to my cabin, grabbed a flashlight, and started walking toward the back end of the ship, 2 more decks down. That's where I get my first piece of good news. As I started walking toward the back end of the ship in the dark, I see lights on in the back 1/3. Right then and there, if I have lights on, I have a generator running, which means I can get power to pumps, which means I can save the ship. But as I get to the middle passageway, I'm at the widest portion of the ship. The force of the blast has rippled across 60 of the 66 feet and crushed one of the 3 repair lockers that where we respond to fire, flooding, or an explosion like this, and no one is around. I rounded the corner on what's supposed to be the mess line in that middle passageway in the ship, and as I rounded it, this is what it would normally look like. This is where the crew had lined up, grabbed the gold trays, slide it along, get their chicken fajitas, their refried beans, their rice, the dessert. They get to the end of the passageway, turn to the left and walk into the mess decks, get something to drink, and sit down to eat lunch. But as I rounded the corner that morning, this is what I saw instead. It is a mangled wall of stainless steel shoved toward me. I can't get around it, I can't get over it, so I back out, walk through a door, open the door to my main medical treatment area. It's in the dark and none of my medical personnel are around. Not my chief hospital corpsman, not my third-class hospital corpsman, or a young deck seaman that wanted to learn to be a medic. So what do? Okay, wait, there's a great design on our medical. The back doors open out onto the mess decks, and why did we do that? Each of the tables are the perfect width and length to take a wounded sailor and lift them up and set them down and save their lives. It's our mass casualty triage area. But as I walk through medical to walk out onto the mess decks, the doors don't open out. Instead, they're folded in, blown into medical, almost ripped off the hinges. And as I step out onto my darkened mess decks with a couple of emergency lights shining, all I see are shattered glass, shattered plates, knives, forks, spoons, trays, food scattered everywhere, and no one around. Okay. Down 1/3 on damage control, don't have a medical, don't have medical personnel, don't have a mass casualty area, still don't know the extent of the damage. So I crunch, slip, slide, walked across the mess decks area and got over to the port side. Just on the other side of that door looking to the right is the mess line that I just showed you. What do I see instead? It is this wall of metal that's lifted up at a 60-degree angle, completely cutting off the left side of the ship. I can't get back it through or around. So I go back into the darkened mess decks thinking I have to get to the central control station, that nerve center that's also co-located with Damage Control Central, and I glance up and see light coming from the mess decks area. So what did I do instead? I said, maybe I can see how bad the damage is. So I walked up to what the mess or galley area where we prepare the crew's meals is supposed to look like. Looking at it right here, what you actually see, this is where we prepare it, beautiful stainless steel looking good. Instead, this is what I'm greeted with instead. That's the interior of USS Cole, completely blown apart. That large green piece used to be the overhead to main engine room number 1. It's been blown into the overhead of the port side passageway. From where I'm standing, I can literally take 2 steps to the left. I'm at that waist-high piece of metal looking down. And as I look, I can see down into what's left of main engine room number 1. from the side of the ship into that point is over 20 feet, and it is just this gaping hole in the side and a large cavern. I can hear the water from Aden Harbor lapping in the engine room. I can see the sunlight glistening off the side, and now I can smell fuel, and lots of it. We estimated that the Yemenis kept pumping fuel on the ship at that 2,000 gallon per minute rate for at least 5 to 7 minutes after the blast before they got their wherewithal and shut the valve down on the pier. Coupled with the cracked fuel tanks, we estimated that over the next couple days, we would leak over 60,000 gallons of fuel into Aden Harbor. Now, my apologies right up front. We as a nation are making the decision to go green. But in this particular moment, I'm sorry. I did not pause to fill out the EPA spill report. Just some things you have to let go. But it's not what I smell at this point that I worry about. We have not been able to electrically isolate that part of the ship yet. And down in all that fuel, I'm seeing flashes of light, and now I'm hearing it's live electrical wires dipping in and out of that fuel. And I'm thinking, not only have we had a devastating explosion, now I'm going to have a major fire on my hands. I have got to get to the central control station. So I back out of the mess line area, back through the darkened mess decks, walked out, rounded the corner, and came face to face to something that a commanding officer hopes he never sees. Lying in the passageway was one of my sailors, and it was very clear from the extent of his injuries that he's dead. 2 of my sailors are standing there staring down at disbelief that this is happening. All I did was look down, looked at them, and went, that little bump was all it took. They locked eyes with mine, and I said, where's your general quarter station? First one says repair 2, which is the locker up at the forward end of the ship. The other one, without saying a word, says repair 3. They both go to take off, and I looked at the second one and go, wait. Before you go to your general quarter station, come back. Go to one of the aft berthing compartments, get a blanket, let's get our shipmate covered and moved out of the way. We can't use the left side of the ship. We have to use the right or starboard side for all our damage control efforts. Can you do that? He said, yes, sir. To this day, I still don't know who those 2 sailors were, but I know they did their job. At that point in time, I came face to face with the reality. When I shoved all the crew back inside, I did not know that we didn't have a mass casualty area. What did the crew do? They innovated on the spot, and as far as you could see down that passageway and across the back passageway across the ship were all of the wounded. Broken bones, shrapnel, cuts, scrapes, bruises, shock. 2 to 3 sailors working on every one of them to save their lives. At that point in time, as the captain, I would have given anything to bend down and talk to my wounded sailors. But I can't. They are not my number one priority. My number one priority has to be the ship, because if we can't save the ship, nothing else is going to matter. I step amongst the wounded, rounded the corner, and walked into the central control station. It was a hurricane of activity. My engineer is working to the left with our engineers, determine the status of the generator, how many pumps and how much spare power we have. To my right, the executive officer working with the damage control assistant, plotting where the primary damage and where the secondary damage is. At that point, I get to make the smartest decision of my command tour, and I kept my mouth shut. The last thing I needed to do would be to walk in as the captain and take charge when I didn't have full knowledge and context. So instead, I stood there for about a minute and then said, Chief Engineer XO, when you 2 are ready, tell me what you've got. They wrapped up what they were doing, came briefed me on the status of the ship. At that point in time, of the 4 main engineering spaces on board USS Cole, main engine room number 1, auxiliary machinery room number 1, auxiliary machinery room number 2, and main engine room number 2, main 1 had bore the brunt of the blast, along with auxiliary machinery room number 2 and flooded. Auxiliary machinery room number 1 forward and main engine room number 2 aft were still not flooded. Chief engineer asked the point-blank question, are we going to lose the ship? She knew the answer, but all I did was look at her and say, no, if all we've lost are 2 of the 4, we can actually sustain more damage. They suddenly realized it wasn't a matter of if, but when we could save USS Cole, and the tension level went down by an order of magnitude. I turned the damage control over to my executive officer, walked up to the middle of the ship, and when I arrived, more good news. There's my chief hospital corpsman, my baby doc, my 3rd class, and my young deck seaman. They're already doing triage. Already I have 1, 2, 3 sailors in metal litters, strapped in and ready to be evacuated off the ship. One of the things that we had to work on is, if you look in the picture, there is a brow that goes down to the pier. I had not put that down, and they were already working to try and get it. It was going to take well over an hour. But as the chief hospital corpsman briefs me on the wounded, as I look over at the third one, it is my senior chief gas turbine technician. He's the senior most enlisted on my ship, the head of my damage control training team, and his wife is my ship's ombudsman. And I'm worried that I might lose my connection to the families back home. He looks at me as I'm getting the brief, lifts up his head, and motions me over. So I walked over to his litter. I knelt down. He reached up and grabbed my hand. He said, "Captain, I don't think I'm going to make it." And I looked at him and said, "Senior Chief, I don't want to hear that. I want you to think your wife Lisa and those two blonde-haired kids of yours want to see their daddy again." He said, "But sir, you don't know how badly I'm hurt. In fact, I did." Just forward of that galley area, a piece of metal had slammed into the chief petty officer's mess, that mid-level layer of leadership and management. Because of the dynamics of the explosion, he'd been blown from the lounge area head over heels and had landed at the very back end of the chief's mess and was buried under debris. And when they finally got back to him as the last person in there, he's lying on his back, perfectly calm, looking up at him and says, "Hey, don't worry about me, but I think there's body parts around here. Be careful." The rescue teams don't say a word. They just bend down, lift the debris off of him. When they get down to him, it's not body parts. Compound fracture to his right leg, and it's folded up and across his chest with his boot near his ear. So they reached down, they said, "We got to get your leg straightened out to get you out of here, Senior Chief. We're going to do it on 3. They grabbed his leg, ready, 1, flipped his leg out straight. Typical Navy, we're a little ahead of schedule. Strap him into a litter, and we get him ready to evacuate off the ship. The same token, while I get that brief and I'm talking to the Senior Chief, they brought a chief up. He's lying on the deck. They're working on him. But I could tell they were losing him. As I'm standing in the middle of the ship looking down, I watched the only chief that we lost in that attack die. My chief hospital corpsman is heartbroken that one of his fellow chiefs has been lost. He stood up, told him he had to make the call, and he made it, and then he didn't want to give up. And he turned to go back in, and I literally had to grab him and turn him around and say, "Chief, he's gone. There's nothing more you can do. I need you to pull yourself together because we've got a lot of other sailors here that need you to save their lives." And this is how I was blessed that day. He said, "Give me just a minute." He walked to the other side of the ship, was back less than a minute later, and was full on in saving those lives at that point. We moved the chief aside and began to look forward. The navigator came down. She would go ashore. We would get the brow down. We would evacuate the wounded off the ship. When she goes in, a French press reporter who had heard the blast had contacted the French embassy in the capital of Sana'a, who had contacted Djibouti. They flew a medical team in that night. They took 11 of my most seriously wounded sailors and flew them to Djibouti. The next day, the Air Force would fly all the wounded in Aden and all the wounded out of Djibouti into Landstuhl, Germany, then back stateside for treatment. As a testament to how well my crew did that first day, we evacuated 33 wounded off the ship in 99 minutes, and of those 33, 32 would survive, including the senior chief. Absolutely phenomenal job. My navigator who had left, she didn't come home with one of those medical evacuation aircraft. 2 days later, she got on an airplane, flew back to Aden, made her way from the airport downtown to check in with the admiral, came down after she checked in with him at the hotel, got onto the pier, came out to a boat, sailed a Yemeni boat across the harbor, walked across the refueling pier, up the brow, and reported back aboard for duty. That's the level of dedication I had in my junior officers. Absolutely phenomenal job. Already we're seeing the sacrifice. 4.5 hours after the blast, when the ship's stable, we know what the status of the wounded are, we did the muster report. I don't care how long it takes, but it must be 100% accurate first time out of the barrel. Why? Because I knew as a result of that muster report, families back here at home were going to get a knock on their door with the news that they never want to hear, and they would go on that long list that we honor today. It took us 45 minutes, and at the end, we knew we had 4 killed that were down on the pier. We had 12 missing in the wreckage of the galley area that we were going to have to start working on figuring out how to get out, and all of the wounded were now being taken out. So we took a deep breath and knew what was going to happen. We would be in port using tried and true techniques for the next 17 days to keep that ship afloat. This is the shaft that starts in main engine room number 1 through auxiliary machinery room number 2. This is where it came into main engine room number 2 to take a 20-gallon per minute leak rate down to a few drips per minute. We would also be working as we went through. This was the door down to main engine room number 1, and you can tell by the power of the blast that door's blown in as a hardened steel door over a foot, which is why we could never access the space to find the sailors that were down there, and in fact had to go through a ventilation shaft to get down into the engine room itself. This is the only picture taken of me during our time in Aden when I recorded for the American people to tell them that my crew was doing a phenomenal job, and they in fact were the true heroes in this entire event. This was taken the first morning after the blast, and you can just tell looking at them. The crew is exhausted, but they've saved their ship and they've saved their shipmates. We would be in that port for 17 days alongside that pier. We almost lost the ship on Saturday night when our only generator quit, and God loves sailor ingenuity. One of my sailors came up, we rigged portable pumps, ran the hoses down, jury-rigged fittings, and filled the flask for the generator, and after numerous trials, finally got it restarted. Going into Monday morning, we were without power about 24 hours. As a matter of fact, they even woke the president up at 4:30 in the morning, President Clinton, and told him the ship's without power, it's sinking, and we don't think they can save it. And what did we do? We're backed into a corner, and we did not give up on our ship. We did not give up on ourselves. Absolutely amazing job. But after 17 days, it was time to get underway. 23 miles down the coast was this heavy lift ship called Blue Marlin. It was like a large floating dry dock. 4 Yemeni tugs came out to us, hooked up their lines, and gently pulled us out into the middle of the harbor. I had put the ship back at general quarters and had mandated complete silence because I knew the crew would be able to hear if something was going wrong long before they ever saw it happening. And as we gently got pulled out into the middle of Aden Harbor that morning, how did Cole do? Rock solid, quality, American-made workmanship. Not so much as even a creak or a groan. The announcing system, the morning we got hit, had failed, along with the backup system. There had been no way to tell the crew what had happened, where to go, what to do, and what had they done? They fell back on their training, and they divided into one of 3 groups: damage control to save the ship, triage to save their shipmates, security to stop another attack. We had restored most of that announcing system over the last 17 days, and back on the flight deck, we had a stereo system set up that we normally use when we do picnics when we're underway. Once all the tugs cast off and the lead tug started to tow us out of the port, I turned to my executive officer and said, XO, play the first song. First song that we played, Star-Spangled Banner. You bet. I wanted our national anthem coming off that ship, echoing across the harbor to send the signal to the Yemeni people that despite what had happened to us, we were going to leave with our head held high. As we're getting towed out, though, you'll see in the upper right corner, there's a picture there. There's a small pier sticking out, and there's 2 Yemeni Navy patrol boats there. And as USS Cole is coming up toward that pier, what did those Yemeni sailors do? They got into their dress uniforms. They came down onto the pier, turned towards us as we get towed by, and rendered honors. And what did we do? We called attention to port, and we returned those honors to them. Once clear, though, I turned back to my XO and said, XO, play the second song. Second song that we played, Star-Spangled Banner again. You bet. Second time, though, Jimi Hendrix version. Then we rounded the corner. We're on that long stretch straight headed out of the harbor. I'm feeling pretty good as the captain and lowered my guard ever so slightly. Turned to the XO and said, XO, crew's earned it. Let them play what they want. I wanted a good cultural signal of rock and roll coming off the ship. Unfortunately, a few seconds later, I don't hear a good cultural signal. because they have turned the volume on the stereo all the way up. They have turned the volume on the announcing system all the way up. And the next thing I hear coming out of that speakers are just vibrating noise. And for the first time in 2.5 weeks, I lose my cool. I turn to the XO and using rather expressive sailor-like language, asked him, XO, what the is that? Get that shut off right now. He gets wide-eyed, tears out of the bridge, headed back toward the flight deck to shut it down, calls me up. It's halfway through the song. XO, what took you so long? Well, sir, as I was going out on the port side, the ladders had been damaged by the blast. I wanted to take my time, sir, because, you know, safety is our #1 priority. Do you want me to shut off the song? I said, no, just a better selection at a better volume would be appreciated. But who had they picked? A great American, guy named Kid Rock. And what was the song? American Badass. I may have wanted a cultural signal, but in a way only a sailor could do. They were sending their own unique signal back to the Yemenis people. So we get towed 23 miles down the coast, and early the next morning, I'm getting positioned over this heavy lift ship, Blue Marlin, and we spend all the next day getting gently lifted up and out of the water. And by the end of the day, here's USS Cole. The reason we're cocked off at that 17.5-degree angle is because the deepest part of the ship is actually that sonar dome up forward. The commanding officer of Blue Marlin says, you want to go take a look? I said, sure. So he puts me in the yellow basket, drops me down, and I walk between the 2 screws and the rudders and up the port side of the ship. And when I get to the middle, I purposely had kept my head down. And when I get up to the middle of the ship, I turned, looked up, and now for the first time I could see the extent of the damage. Cracks went to within 18 inches of the keel, and measured top to bottom and side to side, the hole was 40 by 40 feet. It was as if a giant had taken his fist, punched it in the side of the ship, moved it around, and pulled it back out. You could see from the fuel tanks in the bottom of USS Cole all the way through to the overhead in the galley area itself. To give you an idea of perspective, that's a guy in a white t-shirt standing down on deck. Absolutely amazing job in what my crew had accomplished that day. But at the end of the day, we're up on Blue Marlin, and we have managed to demonstrate what we all hope, that resiliency. We know that we have lost sailors, and we had done a departures honor ceremony for all 12 of those sailors as they'd come off the ship. But in closing, I'd like to take you back to the first day. When Navy ships are in port, just like bases and posts around the world, at 8 o'clock in the morning, we always hold colors. We play the national anthem and we raise the flag to fly over us for the day. In our case, it was at a flagstaff at the back end of the flight deck. Then somewhat a little differently, at sunset for the Navy, calculated no matter where we are in the world when we're in port, we lower that flag and wait until the next morning to raise it again. As we're coming up on sunset that first day, the ship is listing but stable, the wounded are ashore, the 5 killed are ready to begin the journey home to their families, and we have 12 trapped in the wreckage, and the XO and I are standing at the back end of the flight deck. My XO looks at me and says, Captain, what do you want to do about colors? Do you want to leave it and hold it like we normally do? Shows that they haven't disrupted our routine? Do you want to lower it to half-mast to honor the 17 sailors killed and 37 wounded? What do you want to do about colors? And I remember I turned to my XO, then I turned to that flag, all stained with the dirty black residue from the explosion. I looked over at Aden where the lights were coming on in the twilight. I turned back to my XO and I said, XO, we're not going to have colors. I want to leave that flag flying at full mast, and I want lights rigged to shine up on it as a symbol of our resolve that we are not going to let this terrorist attack deter us from our mission of defending freedom. We would leave that flag flying for the next 8 days until the last of those 12 sailors had been pried out of the wreckage, identified, and had begun that long journey home to those grieving families back here stateside. On the 9th day, we held a memorial ceremony. Cots that had been brought on board were set up back on the flight deck. That's where the crew sat. Up on the missile deck, all the support forces that had come on board the ship and had helped us for the past few days and were going to be there the entire time. FBI, NCIS, Mobile Diving Salvage Unit 2, Norfolk Naval Shipyard, crew members from other ships, Donald Cook, Hawes, and Camden, had all come aboard and were helping us, and we're standing up there. Our chaplain, who had actually been with the aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean, had flown out to us that day and administered to the crew. And as we approached sunset, he got up and walked to the mic and gave the invocation. I spoke, and then we had a sailor from every rank that we'd lost speak. Officer, Chief Petty Officer, enlisted, and then as a crew we sang Amazing Grace. Chaplain gave the benediction, and at sunset we lowered the flag and folded it and had 17 sailors lined up on the starboard side of the ship. And as we took that folded flag, now our battle ensign, and we passed it from sailor to sailor, we paused, rang the ship's bell twice, announced the name of the shipmate that we'd lost, and rendered that last final salute. When it got to the end, my command master chief took the flag and presented it to me, and several months later, I gave it to my relief, and when he rebuilt USS Cole, that flag is now mounted on the mess decks of USS Cole, right there in Norfolk, Virginia, if you ever get a chance to get down there. But trust me, I'm keeping an eye on that flag. Ships don't last forever. That flag was our source of inspiration. We could wake up in the middle of the night with some pretty horrific images running through our mind, look back, and see that flag proudly flying under lights. And every morning we would wake up and see that flag proudly flying at the back end of our ship. When USS Cole finishes serving our nation, that flag is going to come off and go into a museum because it's part of our naval heritage, it's part of our nation's history. Today, Memorial Day, on the hallowed ground of the most violent conflict our nation has ever seen, we pause to remember all of those who fought for the sake of freedom, who gave their last full measure and their lives to ensure that we remain the greatest nation of the world. It has been an honor and a privilege. God bless our nation and every single one of you for letting those young men and women serve, put themselves in harm's way, and do what's necessary to keep our country safe. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, Commander. You faced pure satanic evil, and as General George Patton said, thank God for men like you and for men like those sailors that you lost, and for all of our patriots who have lost over the years. We thank the good Lord for that. We also want to extend a word of appreciation to Post 104 member and Major General Scott West and the DeLonzio family for being with us today, for having Commander Lippold with us. We certainly thank you for what you have done for us. It's certainly our honor and our pleasure to have you. And our commander will now have some comments. Commander.
Commander, would you please step up here? Give me a second, man. First off, thank you, sir. Thank you for the words. And on behalf of the American Legion Post 104, Veterans of Foreign War Post 8955, for being our Memorial Day ceremony guest speaker on May 30th, 2022, we present you with our parting gift to you.
Oh, thank you so much.
No problem. And you can set that down, sir, because I got something else for you. And we are very fortunate that we have a auxiliary member by the name of Donna McCain. Donna, please join us. Donna McCain is also part of the Quilt of Valor. And so Donna McCain and her, I call them the Quilt Ladies. They are a very fantastic group. They have presented you with this quilt, and we'll open it up here shortly. It does have your name on it. It says Quilt of Valor. And there is a tradition, we have to drape it over you, sir. Yep, okay. We'll hold it up first so everybody can see it. Okay. And that's it. And we have a certificate that goes with that. Certificate reads, Commander Retired Kurt Lippold, United States Navy, excuse me, 30 May 2022, Appomattox, Virginia. The Quilt of Valor Foundation wishes to recognize you and your service to our nation. We consider it a privilege to do so. Though we may never know the extent of your sacrifices to protect and defend the United States of America, we award you this Quilt of Valor as an expression of gratitude for a grateful nation. There you go, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, sir, we'll let you sit down now, sir. I'll put this up here. You can take that off. You want to take that off? We have a tradition. We always put everybody in the quilt, so this way we can say we've seen them in it. So there's one last thing I'd like to say in parting and leaving, and I want to again thank Mr. Don Jones, who's also part of the American Legion. But Don has organized with the Civil War Museum, just short of the surrender grounds there, that they're open today and it's free for everybody to go into it. If you are a veteran, spouse, family member, guest, it's free for you to get into that. And then just in case if you have not been there and don't want to do it today, the Civil War Museum now has Blue Star Friday, is that correct? Blue Star Friday, where again, it is open for the summer, every Friday. It's open to any veteran, active duty, service member, family to get in there to go see the Civil War Museum for free. So with that, I turn it back to our MC, Howard. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commander. And again, thank you, Commander Lippold, for being with us today and for sharing that. The veterans leave today. President Linda Mays and President Sally Walker and Donna McCain are going to have one of these to give to each veteran to put in the window of their home. Linda, thank you for that. Now I'd like to call a Post 104 chaplain, the Reverend Gene Riffey, with us to pronounce the benediction, and that'll be followed by taps by Post 104 bugler Keith Hamilton, and that will conclude our service with taps in honor of all of those who made the supreme sacrifice for us today.
Can we uncover, please? Heavenly Father, we thank you for this privilege of being able to celebrate this day. It is a day that we have set aside to honor, memorialize those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Heavenly Father, we do not here today memorialize event or places. Today, we are remembering men and women who courageously defended something they felt was worth of their giving their last full measure, so that future generations would experience what no other nation in the history of this world has known. They defended life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The values that they say we are dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal in your eyes and in the heart of this nation. We thank you for the blessing of having their like among us. We further ask that as we celebrate this day, we will be inspired to honor them by emulating their strength of character and the examples of their lives. Father God, continue to bless this nation with men and women such as these and inspire us to live up to the standards that they have set before it. So as they did, we here today pledge our very lives to the great task set before us, to serve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. In thy holy name, Lord God Almighty, we thank you. Amen.
This concludes our service. Thank you for being here.